One of the most recognizable legends of the contemporary internet is that of Slenderman, a figure whose description has been solidified over time through thousands of stories, images, and testimonies shared online. He is depicted as a humanoid being, unnaturally tall beyond the limits of any ordinary person, always dressed in a formal black suit and with the unsettling peculiarity of having no face. This trait, the absence of any recognizable features, has become one of the most consistent and repeated elements in depictions of the creature, reinforcing his anomalous and disturbing nature. As for what is known of his story, accounts generally place Slenderman in remote natural settings, most often in forests. These places, tied to the unknown and the unreachable, provide the backdrop where he is said to wander and where, according to the tales, he carries out his primary activity, the disappearance of people. Children are most often mentioned among his victims, which only heightens the sense of menace attributed to him. His alleged presence has been documented in various old photographs and images, where he appears partially concealed in shadows, behind structures, or standing motionless among the trees, always in wooded or dimly lit surroundings. The consistency of this pattern has reinforced the belief that his natural habitat lies within landscapes of dense vegetation, far from the public eye. The way he acts toward his victims is described with the same consistency across various testimonies and digital narratives. It is said that he stalks people from a distance, watching them persistently until they fall into a state of anxiety and overwhelming fear. When he finally draws near, the effect he produces goes beyond simple terror. He places his victims in a deep trance, an altered state of consciousness from which they cannot free themselves. Under this influence, those affected are compelled to walk toward him, as if their will had been completely erased. This detail, repeated in countless stories, has been essential in shaping the myth, for it turns Slenderman into something more than a pursuer. It makes him an irresistible force that exerts psychological domination over those who encounter him. Although all this information has emerged as part of a collective narrative, fueled and expanded through forums, social networks, and online communities, there is an additional element that lends a different dimension to the myth. Beyond the collaboratively created fiction, it has been suggested that Slenderman might have a real-world precedent on which, whether by coincidence or direct inspiration, his creation was based. This possible historical or documentary origin does not negate the fictional nature of the legend, but it introduces a compelling point of interest: the possibility that an earlier figure already present in old stories or visual records may have served as the foundation for the creature that would ultimately grow into a cultural phenomenon within the digital imagination. In 1974, within the files of the small Department of Rural Studies at Chiang Mai University, there appeared for the first time a note that never reached formal publication. A field researcher named Aaron Fromthep had gathered testimonies and photographs in several mountain villages of northern Thailand, where people spoke of the Tall One, a term loosely rendered by the villagers as Kon Yai or Phi Phon Yai. This figure was described with the same mixture of dread and pity that science at the time reserved for phenomena straddling the social and the pathological. The note, typed on yellowed pages and folded away in aging folders, would later become the first link in the legend I recount here, the legend of an entity that, in its local origins, was less supernatural than human, yet whose form and story eventually became impossible to separate. The first testimonies were recorded in Ban Hoi Sawan, a small settlement on the hillside between Pai and Mae Hong Son, Ban Nong Klang, on the plains of Udon Thani province, and a riverside village along the Mekong near Nakhon Phanom. In the 1970s, the people of these regions lived from rice, forage crops, and seasonal migration to cities such as Chiang Mai. Within these rural microcosms, there were families with children who grew extraordinarily tall, individuals whose stature far exceeded the local average, with elongated hands, upright posture, and features that, to the villagers, did not always fit neatly within the category of ordinary human. The scientific explanation that circulated quietly spoke of endocrine disorders, pituitary gigantism, Marfan syndrome, or varying degrees of acromegaly. Yet it was the way the community wove those bodies into their social fabric that gave life to the legend. The first oral accounts, collected by Aaron Fromthep, describe everyday family and social behaviors. Strange children who grew up in separate houses, young men who worked only at night because their long, echoing footsteps disturbed the market stalls, and elderly women who left offerings along the roadside so that the tall one would pass without glancing at their homes. Fear was not always sharp or immediate. At times, the reaction was indifference or exclusion. Families sometimes sent their relatives with atypical bodies to live in distant huts or to relocate to the city. That gesture of hiding was later interpreted by subsequent generations as if the villagers had tried to conceal evidence of contact with something non-human. One incident stands out in the file dated September 12, 1976. In Ban Hoi Sawan, an 8-year-old girl named Mali, the daughter of a farming family, claimed that the tall one had followed her from the forest path to the doorway of her home. The girl described a figure taller than a coconut tree that did not speak, that stretched out fingers like branches, and that looked without eyes. Adult witnesses gave conflicting accounts. Her mother insisted it was a young relative who had migrated away, while the village chief preferred to explain it as fatigue and superstition. The medical report, consulted by Aaron Fromthep, mentioned a 27-year-old man named Somchai, exceptionally tall and with a thoracic deformity, who lived in the area and worked as a bamboo cutter. Somchai suffered from severe scoliosis, which gave him a more elongated appearance and a peculiar gait. In the decades that followed, the legend moved in two directions. Among anthropologists and physicians, it remained a case study in rural health and stigmatization among the local population and some young amateur researchers. It evolved into the tale of a liminal entity. Krang Yai, the local term that eventually came to define the figure, was told as a being that appeared on the forest's edge at dusk, that lured curious children with silent promises, and whose presence could foretell either a death or someone's departure from the village. The narrative accumulated details over time: clothing worn thin by jungle humidity, an unusually long neck, hands that could brush the tops of trees without climbing them. The testimonies gathered for the department's final report in 1979 reveal a social pattern. Individuals of great height were at once objects of family protection and of community mistrust. Villages developed ambivalent rituals, offerings of rice at crossroads, prayers for the health of the different, that outwardly expressed respect yet in practice reinforced isolation. From a clinical perspective, these practices denied them full access to medical care. From the perspective of oral tradition, they nourished the belief that extraordinary height was tied to something other, something older than the farming settlements themselves. Elders spoke of long men in times of migration, beings who neither reproduced nor formed families, and so the genealogy of the myth became intertwined with the realities of medicine. There were episodes of minor violence and larger rumors. In 1977, a story circulated in Lue province, and never confirmed in official records, about a woman who, while walking out at night, stumbled upon a tall, thin figure that tugged at her apron. The version that slipped into the local newspaper turned it into a kidnapping. The version preserved in the community reshaped it into a moral warning against walking alone. The provincial press of the time favored short, sensational notes, while doctors, when consulted, wrote cautiously about the need for access to endocrinological diagnosis and about the limitations of rural healthcare. The decade closed with two clear consequences. First, the legend crossed borders into literary and folkloric circles. Foreign students traveling to Chiang Mai cited the stories in papers on popular anthropology, and the figure of the tall one unintentionally took on the texture of an archetype, the extremely tall man, the wanderer without refuge, that readers from other cultures associated with their own imagery of the uncanny. Second, in practical terms, rural medical care remained scarce. Many of the cases that had fueled the legend never received hormonal evaluation or orthopedic support. That institutional neglect became, for both the villagers and later researchers, the most evident root of a legend that could well have been, in large part, the story of bodies that society did not know how to include.